We are going to begin now. For those of you who have not been here or were not here for the earlier speaker this morning, my name is Jason Stewart. I'm a reference librarian here at the Regent University Library. I'd like to welcome you to the speaker series as part of the Living Word exhibit on biblical antiquities. Very glad to have you all here. It's been a great series. The exhibit is great. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly suggest that you do. Enjoyed it myself. This morning we will have Rabbi Michael Panitz speaking for us. He trained at the University of Pennsylvania and at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He's been a rabbi since at Temple Israel in Norfolk since 1992, though he's been a rabbi longer than that, I believe. Temple Israel was started in the 1950s, and I'd like to welcome any congregants who might be here to watch their rabbi speak. I noticed that it was announced in your March newsletter, so glad to have you here. Rabbi Panitz values his Jewish tradition and the integration of it with contemporary life. He goes beyond distinctly Jewish communities to speak on radio, to engage in interfaith conversations and endeavors, and to come to college campuses like these. And I'm really grateful for that we have him here today, and I hope you are as well. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you for those kind words of introduction. Good morning to all. Shalom. You know what shalom means? I'll ask our 10th graders. What does shalom mean? Peace. Peace. Are you a 10th grader? It means hello. Actually, it means peace. But we use it to say both hello and goodbye. We have a fascinating subject to think about today, and there's also a treat. I brought an old book with me. I brought an edition of the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and what we call the 12, the prophets whose works are shorter as Amos, Hosea, Micah, Jonah, Habakkuk, and so on and so forth. It's a book from my personal collection. It was printed in Venice in 1517. So the book is almost a half millennium old. And I've been thinking about creating a special exhibition of, I don't own any incunabuli, which are Hebrew books from before 1500, but this is pretty close. I have a number of old books that we're going to be having for an exhibition starting in the year 2017, which will be the 500th birthday of that book. But so this is the first opportunity I've had to show this cultural treasure in public. So you're here for a very special moment. We have some gloves on the table, so if you want to handle the book, you'll be asked to put on the glove before you do that. This book, on the other hand, I'll be allowing you to distribute from one person to the next while I speak. This is a reprint of a book written in 1899 called The Censorship of Hebrew Books by William Popper. And this reprint in 1968 is not a rare book, although it's a very important book. And I have the book open to plate 4 in the back because there are signatures here which are identical to the signatures in the book that I brought in. Signatures of monks who were censors working for the papal Inquisition to censor Hebrew books. And they were very proud of their work, which seems a bit bizarre today. But how did we get such a cultural object? How did this come to be is the organizing question of what I want to share with you. And I hope to speak for about 20 minutes or so and deliberately stop there, which will be halfway through the hour that we have together, so as to leave ample time for questions and answers, and near the end to give you the opportunity to share with the exploration of the book. So first of all, some preliminary words about words, scrolls, and codices. One of the most important statements at the very, very start of the Christian tradition is the beginning of your fourth gospel. In the beginning was the Word, right? En arche hen ten logos. That is actually a Greek version of a Hebrew idea, which was developed by the rabbis who lived at approximately the same time as the church fathers, focused on the first chapter of Genesis. Think about the story of creation. The very first active verb in the Bible is Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The Hebrew, "and God said," is vayomer, and the verb stem, amr, is to speak in Hebrew. Vayomer, and God said. Which is to tell us that in the biblical conceptualization, the act of creation is done by the word, by speech. If you were to study the pagan accounts of the creation of the universe, which existed when the Bible first appeared, the Bible is not the first work of literature by any means. It may be the oldest work which has endured and had so much influence upon billions of people. But the Bible represents a revolution against thousands of years, literally thousands of years of Mesopotamian polytheistic pagan religion. And thanks to the efforts of archaeologists, primarily in the 19th century, also in the 20th century, we now know a lot about what the Babylonians and Sumerians and Mesopotamians in general thought about the creative process. They did not say God, or even the gods, said. They spoke about what was called theomachy, a fight, a struggle, a warfare between one god and another god. In their theology, the world they lived in was simply projected up onto the heavens. They lived in a world of warring city-states. Life was insecure. Your city could be attacked at any time. You could be captured, you could be killed, you could be enslaved at any time. Very insecure world they lived in, a world of perpetual warfare. And they believed in a heaven that was likewise populated by gods like themselves, gods who were jealous and antagonistic, and they felt so helpless before these gods. So their religion consisted in making sacrifice to all of the gods so that none of them would be angry with them. It's a little bit like being a dry cleaner in Chicago in the 1920s. Anyone watch The Untouchables? I know I'm dating myself. With Elliot Ness. Remember The Untouchables? In the era of organized crime? Well, the organized criminals would go to dry cleaners and offer them protection. Because if you wouldn't pay for protection, they could easily firebomb your dry cleaning shop and destroy your livelihood in seconds. And the police were helpless to protect you. So the prudent dry cleaner would pay protection to the Gambino mob, right? And then along comes another mob, and he'd pay protection to them as well. It wouldn't pay for him to say to them, well, the Gambinos are protecting me, because he could be wiped out long before the lieutenants or capos of the Gambinos could come on the scene, let alone Chicago's finest. So that's what Mesopotamian theology was like. The gods are very dangerous. As they said about Lord Byron, they're mad and bad and dangerous to know. So you pay them all off. That was the practical religion there. How different from the Jewish religion? In the Jewish religion, there's no one struggling against the God of Israel. The one God, by definition, has no supernatural power that could conceivably oppose his divine will. And so there's no struggle in the creation of the universe. And that's the importance of that verb, and God said, which is the origin of the Christian notion, in the beginning was the Word. It shows that monotheism is not just a matter of arithmetic. It's not just the difference between one God and many gods. It's the difference between a sovereign will and a will which is stymied or checkmated by other coalitions. So far more than arithmetic, it's a whole new and exalted conception of what it is to be in relationship with God. Because there's only one area that God self-limits and doesn't control, and that area is you, your free will. God wants you to say yes, and God won't force you to say yes. God won't turn you into a computer program where to say yes to God is just a matter of fulfilling your programming. If I were to boil down the Hebrew Bible into a wanted ad, okay, like they have in the newspapers, right? I would give the Hebrew Bible in the following words. One eternal, omnipotent deity desperately seeking a relationship with finite creature possessing free will. That would be the Bible as want ad. So the only thing which restrains God, and that's a self-accepted restraint on God's part, is that you have the power to say no to God, and that power makes your yes all the more meaningful. If God wanted a world where no one could say no to God, God could have stopped with wolves and sheep, because animals never disobey God's will, but they're only cognizant of the natural laws that are only one half of God's will. They're not cognizant of the spiritual. So to get to a creature who's cognizant of the spiritual, God takes a huge risk and creates us, which, by the way, is the same risk that parents make when they create a generation. So that's why we call God our Father in heaven, because we understand the metaphor. So the importance of the word is not to be taken only literally. It's actually the key to what's distinctive about Judaism, and then by extension, what's distinctive about Christianity, in contrast to the pagan religions of antiquity, and may I add, the neo-pagan systems of modernity. Communism is a neo-pagan system. Capitalism is a neo-pagan system. Anything which takes something and makes it ultimate value rather than God is a neo-pagan system, whether people are worshiping the dollar bill or sex or whatever they happen to be worshiping. If it's not God, that's a neo-paganism. So how do you capture that word? How do you receive that word? How do you preserve that word? No argument that the only truly meaningful capturing and reception of the word is in your heart. No argument on that score. But culturally speaking, how do we preserve that word? The 10 words, and by the way, in Exodus 20, it doesn't say the 10 commandments, not in the Hebrew. It says the 10 utterances. So you may know from your schooling that Catholics have one enumeration of how is it 10 commandments, and Lutherans have another enumeration of how is it 10 commandments, and Jews have another enumeration of how is it 10 commandments, which certainly leads to a problem. Which are you going to put up on a public school classroom? It's all very well and good to say the world would be better if there were 10 commandments on the public school classrooms, but we couldn't even decide which 10, how to enumerate them. But the good news is it's not a problem because the Bible itself never says the 10 Commandments, it says the 10 utterances. Now, why do we translate them commandments? Anyone remember the E.F. Hutton commercial? Well, my broker is E.F. Hutton, and he says, and the whole Long Island Railroad car falls silent, right? Because when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. When God speaks, people ought to listen, right? When God gives you an idea, don't treat it as just a helpful hint. Treat it as a commandment, right? We don't have the 10 suggestions, right? We have the 10 commandments. So preserving that word is the task of religious culture. The early preservation of the word was in stone and on pillars. The book of Deuteronomy tells us, when you cross the Jordan, create pillars of stone and whitewash them with plaster so that you can create a writing surface, and inscribe the words of the covenant on that stele. So the inscribed stele, the stone, the plaster, the physical monument, is an early way of preserving the word. Later on, we came to the idea of a scroll. Could I trouble you for one piece of scrap paper? I'm going to show you how a scroll works. Thank you so much. A scroll is not pages sewn into signatures the way a book is. This is a scroll. Notice that unlike a codex, it doesn't have a spine. So where can you stamp the title of the book on a scroll? You can't. You see that? That's where the Hebrew custom of naming a book by its first word comes from. See? Because when you open up the scroll just a little bit and you have the first word there, you can name the scroll by that first word. That's why the book of Genesis in Hebrew is named after its first word, Bereshit, in the beginning. Well, actually, in the beginning sounds like Genesis, but it doesn't always work that way. The book of Exodus in Hebrew is called Shemot, names. Now, what does names have to do with Exodus? It's because if you were to have the book of Exodus as a scroll, which is the technology of books back then, the first two words in Hebrew are Ve'ele Shemot. Now these are the names. So people would have the scroll, they'd make a little tag which would have the title of the scroll, and they would save them in, ancient libraries had what looked like wine racks, and the scrolls would be in these like rhombus-shaped scroll holders. The problem with tags, as you know when you go shopping for clothing, is that tags fall off. So that means that if the scroll is named after its first word, then it doesn't matter if the tag falls off. You can easily find out what that scroll is. When we have a codex, which is a change in technology, taking pages and sewing them into signatures and then into quires and then creating what we call a modern book, then you have a spine and you can put a title on it. So there were codices going back to ancient times. One of the oldest manuscripts of the Gospels is called the Codex Sinaiticus, because it was a codex, not a scroll. It was a codex. This is a codex. It was a codex, and it was kept in the monastery of Santa Caterina at the site that Christians traditionally say is Mount Sinai, in the Sinai Desert. The Arabs call it Jebel Musa, Mount Moses, Jebel Musa. And I've been to that monastery. It's called Santa Caterina, and it has a library that goes back 1,600 years. And its oldest copy of the Gospels is one of the two oldest existing full manuscripts. So a Codex Sinai. So there have been codices for many, many, many years. Until the 1400s, they were all written by hand for obvious reasons, right? Thanks to Johannes Gutenberg, I think you've all studied about him, right, in the mid-1400s, movable type, mechanical printing of books was a revolution in communications as important as the handheld devices that your teachers yell at you if you produce them in class, right? I had a student at a Wesleyan college class this week who was texting surreptitiously, furtively. He had the machine in his lap, and I didn't want to just call him out in a nasty way. So I said to the students, the term paper I'm asking you to write is about an event or a person or an invention or a phenomenon which was important in its day, but whose true importance was in the future. I said, for example, revolutions in technology. And I said, the printing press. You could write a term paper about the printing press, which was as important in its day as Brett, what you're holding in your lap right now is. And he gave me a very sheepish smile, and he put it away. And the important thing is he didn't take it out for the rest of the class. Now, if you've studied the history of the Protestant Reformation, I'm sure many of the students here have studied that, you know that one of the factors that made for the success of the Protestant Reformation is that the evangelicals in the Lutheran camp and in the Zwingli and in the Calvinist camp and so on were able to take advantage of the newfound technology of the printing press to flood the market with their point of view. Now, at the same time, the Jewish minority in Europe was taking advantage of the availability of the printing press. Jewish books were printed starting in the 1470s. The oldest Jewish book to have survived to this day is a commentary on the 5 books of Moses by a French rabbi named Solomon, son of Isaac. Rabbi Solomon, Hebrew is Shlomo for Solomon. Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. His acronym is Rashi, R-S-H-I, Rashi. So the oldest Hebrew book in existence today is the commentary to the 5 books of Moses written by Rashi. Now, he wrote it in the 1000s, but for 400 years it was copied by hand. In the 1470s, it was printed for the first time. As it happens, there's only one extant copy in the world of the Rashi commentary from the 1470s, and it's in the library of the Vatican, of all places. Vatican confiscated a lot of Hebrew books, which is part of what I'm going to be telling you in a few minutes. There's also one stray page of it that survives in the holdings of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York City. When I was a graduate student, I had a job at the library of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, which was the dream job for a bibliophile, just absolutely a dream job. And I became good friends with the special collections librarian. We were fellow PhD students at the same time. And when I take touring groups with me to New York, one of our stops is the rare book room of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and they see wonders. So I'm able to show my students who travel with me that one page that exists of the oldest Hebrew book in existence. This book here was from about 40 years after that. It was published by a non-Jewish publisher. His name was Daniel Bomberg, a man from Flanders. And why did he go into Hebrew book publishing? Because he was a businessman. And he knew that Jews love to read. Because he knew that Jewish culture survives because of the availability of the word as it is taught, as it is commented on. And that the Jewish people in the Middle Ages, without a state of their own, without an army, without a police force, often, and I'm sorry to tell you this, I hope you know this, but if not, you should know this, often persecuted by the majorities, whether Muslim or Christian. Jews were persecuted badly throughout the Middle Ages. That only the internal spiritual fortitude that contact with our sacred traditions gave us allowed us to endure. So having access to our sacred books was, from a national perspective, a matter of life or death. Daniel Bomberg knew that, and he was a very successful businessman printing Hebrew books, although he himself was not Jewish. This is from the Bomberg Bible of 1517. It was published in Venice. It was dedicated to Lorenzo Loredano, who was the Doge of Venice. And on the title page it says the book of the latter prophets, which means Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, etc., published by Daniel, all this is in Hebrew, I'm translating it for you, published by Daniel Bomberg, man of Flanders, and dedicated to the Duke Lorenzo Loredano in the 16th year of his rulership in Venice. So why Venice? Why was there a Jewish community in Venice? Why of all places? Because the early 1500s were a very, very bad time for Jews. Jews had been expelled from one Christian country after another, expelled from England by King Edward Longshanks in 1290, expelled from France by the French king in the year 1390, expelled from Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella. When you have a Columbus Day celebration, you think of, oh, nice Ferdinand and Isabella. They gave Christopher Columbus money to go across the ocean. They're not nice people in my book. They expelled the Jews of Spain, untold misery. 150,000 people set on the road, impoverished, beggared, many of them killed, many of them sold into slavery by unscrupulous sea captains. Those who remained in Spain were forced to fake a conversion to Catholicism, and if they were caught backsliding, they were horribly tortured and made to confess to their quote-unquote crimes. Their crimes was following their conscience. And they were tortured until they would incriminate the other people who were with them, and it was like the Nazi Gestapo, actually. So Jews tried to go to a place where it was less oppressive. And Venice, which was an independent city-state, was one of those places. So Venice became one of the largest Jewish communities in the Western world by the early 1500s. Now, things got worse for the Jews of Italy in the late 1500s. You probably know that the Reformation was a time of great tension between Catholics and Protestants. One of the effects upon the Catholic world was to cause them to circle the wagons and to look doubly and triply askance at anything which might seem like heresy. So starting in 1555, with the election of a new pope, which, of course, happened just so recently, the new pope in 1555 took the name Paul IV, and he enacted an edict that the Jews under his political control would have to be imprisoned in a ghetto. So that's where the ghettoization of the Jews of Italy starts from. And the Jews of Venice, by the end of the 1500s, were in ghettos as well. Now, the confiscation of Hebrew books was a practice that the Reformation-era popes practiced. Ostensibly, they were looking for Jewish writings that were offensive to Christianity. And what would happen is they were able to hold these books for ransom. So this book, for example, was confiscated, and we know from signatures, it was confiscated at least 4 separate times and subjected to censorship 4 separate times. In fact, I can show you. Do we have the handouts that we're... do you see different styles of censorship, bolder lines and lesser lines and so on and so forth? That shows you that different censors are doing the censoring. Because the Jewish community was so committed to being able to keep its scholarship, because that was the secret of Jewish spiritual survival, that the Jewish community would ransom back its books, which meant that to confiscate a book was like the cash cow a gift that keeps on giving. You can confiscate it today, and they'll buy it back, and you can confiscate it again 10 years from now, and they'll buy it back. So this book was confiscated and censored in 1599. If you look at the page that has the censor signatures, you see there are 3 signatures on the bottom of the page. Let's read some Latin together. Okay, the second one is the easiest one to read. Visto per me. It's half Italian, actually. What does visto per me mean? What do you think? Visto per me. Seen by me. Seen by me. And then we have the signature. Fra. What is fra? Brother. He's a monk. Fra Luigi da Bologna. See that? Luigi, brother Luigi of Bologna. Bologna, a city in Italy, of course. And then he tells you a little bit more. Della Ordine de San Domenico, right? That's his order. He's a Dominican monk. Dominican monk. And he signs it in July of 1599. And then we see another one, Visto per me, above that, Fra Renata dam Moda. That's short for Modena. Modena is another city in Italy. And that's 1626. And further down, you see another one who did it 1640. On the other side of the page, I don't know if you have this. There is another one whose name is Camilo, and he does it in the year 1613. So I'll have it open to this page so that you can see that. Now, interestingly enough, I'm going to distribute this book right now, let you have a look at it. Alphabetical list of censors. And we have Luigi da Bologna del Ordine de Santo Domenico. We have Camillo Jagel, and we have Renatos de Modena, and so on and so forth. These were very famous censors. And here we have photographs of their signatures from books that are in the Columbia University Library. Same signatures as you see in. A graphologist would immediately concur. It's the same person. These are not forgeries. These are the actual censors, proud of the work that we, I think, would agree today is most reprehensible. But they were proud of it then. They thought that they were defending the Mother Church against dangerous ideas. So what kind of dangerous ideas are there? I've given you a copy of Isaiah chapter 53. That's the text which is heavily censored. Now, of course, no one is censoring Isaiah. What they're censoring is the commentary underneath it. Commentary was written in the 1200s by Rabbi David Kimchi. It's spelled like kimchi, but he was not a food item. It's Kimchi, David Kimchi. And I have an uncensored copy of his text as well. So just to show you what it was that was being censored, let me read the biblical verse and translate it, and read Rabbi Kimchi's commentary and translate that. All right, we'll do it that way. Isaiah chapter 52, verse 6. You may want to go home and look that up in your Bible. The Hebrew says, Lachen yeda ami shemi, lachen bayom hahu, ki anihu hamedaber hineni. Therefore my people shall know my name, Isaiah says. Therefore on that day that I am he who is speaking, "Here I am." This is all Isaiah speaking in the name of God. On that future day, my people will know my name. So in Christian exegesis, Christian commentary, as Christians read the verse in Isaiah chapter 52, that is pointing towards Jesus. In fact, all of the section of what we call Deutero-Isaiah in Christian commentary is very Christologically pointed. Now, Rabbi Kimchi, of course, doesn't see it that way, and Jews today don't see it that way and never have. So what made Rabbi Kimchi's commentary so offensive to Christians is that he gave the Jewish understanding of all of those kinds of verses. So just to take an example of the verse that I just translated now, Rabbi Kimchi writes, Lachen yeda ami shemi, therefore my people shall know my name. What does that mean? Does it mean that Isaiah is foretelling the birth of Jesus? Rabbi Kimchi says, no. We have a totally different understanding of it. What it means is that she'eni noda bagalut. Today, I am not fully known because my people is in exile. But when I bring my people Israel back to their homeland, when I end the exile, when I send the Messiah, when I finally will send the Messiah, because Jews don't think the Messiah has come yet, then my name will be fully understood by all the peoples because they will see what I have done to affect world history. So in other words, Rabbi Kimchi gives the Jewish retort to the Christian understanding of the book of Isaiah here, or any other book of the Bible. That's why Rabbi Kimchi's commentary was censored again and again and again. Apparently the texts they took out the first time weren't enough, so they had to take out texts over and over again. Now, I inherited this particular book. It's been in my family since the 1950s, which is not very long. I mean, it's only 1/10 of the time that this book has existed. But what I've noticed, two things, and I'll finish my presentation here and take questions. First, I noticed that some censors were harsher than others. Some obliterated the word. Some just put little lines through it, almost as if they were challenging the Jewish reader. If you really know your literature well, you'll be able to read this. If you're a casual student, you won't be able to defeat. But if you're a serious student, you'll be able to read it anyway. So is that possible? Was there perhaps a relationship between the censors and the rabbis? Let me tell you about a book of fiction, but a very lovely book, and I recommend that you take it and read it. It's a wonderful book. It's by Geraldine Banks. It's called The People of the Book, and it's about a famous manuscript and its vicissitudes. The manuscript is called the Sarajevo Haggadah. Sarajevo is an important city in the Balkans, and a beautiful illustrated manuscript from the 1400s from Spain of the Passover story, the Passover Haggadah, color prints and gold leaf, like these beautiful books of hours from the Middle Ages. There is such a Passover book, the Haggadah. It's had so many vicissitudes. How did it survive when the Nazis controlled Yugoslavia in the 1940s? Who hid it? How did it survive the Bosnian Civil War of the 1990s? How did it survive the Papal Inquisition of 1600 when the book was living in Venice? A different chapter of that novel imagines what happened to the book and how it survived. So it's called The People of the Book. It's about the vicissitudes of Jewish history as seen through the lens of the vicissitudes of the scarcely imaginable survival of this one book. I happen to own a facsimile of the Sarajevo Haggadah. I didn't bring it today, but it's my pleasure to invite you if you'd like to come and visit me. I serve at Temple Israel in Norfolk. It's at 7255 Granby Street. Just call the office and arrange to come by sometime. I'll give you a tour of the temple, and I'll show you the Sarajevo Haggadah as well. Not the original, although this is the original, but I'll show you the beautiful artistic facsimile. So that's the first lesson. Maybe there was a relationship. That's what the book posits. And the second thing I want you to see, if you look at your page, is that the censor's ink in some places has faded, and that the printed word begins to come through. May this be an inspiration. May the forces of censorship ultimately lose their power, and the forces of the free exchange of information, the free and peaceful exchange, even of disagreements, may that be what endures. Because if we say that God is our common Father in heaven, and I think we in this room would certainly say that, I know that my kids will disagree sometimes. I'm an earthly father. I've got a daughter and 2 sons, and it's just not possible that they wouldn't disagree. But I always want them to love each other. And if our God is our common Father in heaven, then we who are in different faith communities will disagree. A Jew will see it one way, a Catholic will see it one way, an evangelical Protestant will see it one way, a Buddhist will see it a different way, a Muslim will see it a different way. Let's not be too fast to say, they're wrong, they're going to go to hell, I don't care about them. Let's remember, I think they're wrong. They think I'm wrong. But let's never forget that we are brothers and sisters because the Father in heaven who made us made all of us. Thank you. So we do have some time for questions, and I'd be very happy to take your questions. Let me first turn to our class of 10th graders. I know it's so hard to be the first one, but extra credit for anyone who's brave enough to be the first one to ask a question. Anybody? Someone's smiling. Yes, ma'am. Well, my father of blessed memory was a tremendous book collector. In fact, when he was in rabbinical seminary, the fellow students used to make up little humorous songs and ditties about all the students. And they made up a song about my father and my mother, and the song ended with the refrain, David and Esther and the library. So going back to when he was a very young man, he was already interested as his modest means. I mean, he grew up in a depression. No one had any money then. But when he had 2 cents, he spent one of them on a book. So in the early 1950s, when he was serving a congregation in Washington, D.C., he met a Holocaust survivor who had amassed a collection of books from Europe. And the man was very, very up in years. His name was Hyman Ezra Cohen. I know that because I have his stamp on many, many, many of the books. And so my father bought the Hyman Ezra Cohen collection of books, and that's where this was part of. I don't know who owned it before Hyman Ezra Cohen, but I do have a book stamp from a Jewish communal organization in Poland going back to the 1800s. So the provenance of this book includes, it was part of the Eastern European Jewish community in the 1800s. Then it came to this country at some point before the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, and by the 1950s it entered into my father's library. So that's where this particular volume, I only know a few chapters of its history, but that's what I know. Ma'am. In the Middle Ages and Renaissance? Is that what you're asking? I'll try and give a whole semester answer in 60 seconds. Intergroup religious toleration, which we today accept as a norm, was only a belated, hard-won concession in the world of monotheism. Ironically, pagans who killed each other for lots of reasons didn't kill each other because of religious differences. Because think, if I've got 20 gods and you've got 20 gods and none of them are in common, big deal. That's just the way we are. But if you've got one God and the other person doesn't agree with you, suddenly they're not in the same category. So the sad truth is that both Christianity and Islam were very intolerant of Jews. Islam still is very intolerant of Jews. Some Christians still are. Many Christians are not today. The rise of toleration in Europe only happened because of the stalemate in the wars of religion. There were terrible wars of religion in Germany in the 1500s, the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, the 36 years of civil war in France in the 1500s. The Spanish Armada was basically an attempt by a Catholic country to invade Protestant England. These kinds of wars prompted by the fact that I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, but you believe the wrong way. Okay? I believe that Christ is really present in the Eucharist. You believe that Christ is only symbolically present in the Eucharist. Therefore, die, heretic. And I'm going to help make that happen. That idea was the standard idea, and it was only challenged slowly in the 15 and 1600s, and it was only decisively set aside in the 17 and 1800s. So the answer is not, why did other people persecute Jews? But what's interesting is, when did they stop and why? Because the norm was, I'm sorry to say this, but the norm was to persecute Jews. It's a shameful norm. We should be glad to repudiate it today. But it was the norm until fairly recently. Other questions? Sir? Printed Hebrew book. Right, as opposed to manuscript. The oldest Hebrew manuscript that we have in our possession today is the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in Qumran, which is a cave. It was like a monastic sort of an area. They were Jewish. They were called Essenes, and they were Jews from the 1st century, the time of Jesus actually, who fled Jerusalem for various reasons. Jerusalem was like Sin City as far as they were concerned. They wanted to go to the purity of the desert, and they had a scriptorium. They wrote the books of the Bible, and they wrote their commentaries. We have those scrolls by a happy accident in the 1940s. So we have that. We have older epigraphic evidence. An archaeologist whom I personally know, I invited him and he spoke at my synagogue. His name is Gabriel Barkai, B-A-R-K-A-I. He was investigating a grotto in Jerusalem, and he discovered a little silver amulet about the size of like a cigarette butt. And he took it to a laboratory, and they very carefully unrolled it, and it contains the priestly benediction of the book of Numbers. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord enlighten you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up a divine spirit upon you and grant you peace. It contains that in the original Hebrew, not in the script of the Torah, which is an Aramaic script, but the older script, the Paleo-Hebrew script, which was written in the 600s and 700s and 800s before the Common Era. So the oldest physical instance of a Torah text is as old as the Torah. But the oldest printed Torah text is from the 1400s, because that's when printing began. The question is the stabilization of the text of the Hebrew Scriptures. Remember that when you copy something by hand, there's a danger of scribal error, right? Sometimes you copy a word twice. Sometimes if you have the same word on 2 successive lines, your eye jumps from the one word to the second word. And we have names for this in textual scholarship. We talk about dittography and haplography and homeoteloiot, and all these fancy words that basically means different kinds of scribal errors. So there are scribal errors in the Hebrew Scriptures, unfortunately. For example, Psalm 145, which is very beloved of the Jewish people. We say it 3 times a day. It's an alphabet acrostic psalm, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, except that it's Hebrew, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. But the Nun line is missing. We go from the Mem line to the Samech line. The Nun line is missing. There's no way around that. It's just not there, which means that someone didn't get it right at some point. There's no plausibility to say that King David or a poet of King David's day would have written an alphabet psalm and left out the N line. There are plenty of other alphabet psalms in the book of Psalms that do have an N line. So it's not as if it was taboo to write an N line. That one is missing. Why is it missing? Probably at some point it was the last line on the page and a mouse ate it, or a fungus got it, or a drop of water. I mean, there are 100 reasons why a text can be corrupted. So unfortunately, the evidence does not corroborate what you're claiming. Nonetheless, by 2,000 years ago, the biblical manuscripts that begin to multiply show greater and greater homogeneity, which testifies to a concerted editorial process to stabilize the text. So in its era of formation, it wasn't without variation, and we've got many, many, many tabulations of those variations. But by about 2,000 years ago, once the Bible had achieved canonical status, then the care in copying it tended to make it more and more stabilized. So it's a complex answer of a historical process. Okay, sir.
What a great lecture. First of all, Gavin Barca is one of my professors.
Wonderful.
2 years before he found that. So he still smokes as much today.
It's crazy how much he smokes. I'm sorry to say. Maybe that's why I said cigarette butt, you know.
I was just with him. He lectured for us in New York City. I had come in late because of another meeting, but I don't think we've mentioned the Karaganitsa. Across the hall here, we actually have some of the Karaganitsa. We have quite a bit in the Queen collection.
That's one. I'd like to speak about that a little bit, because Solomon Schechter is a research interest of mine. I'm just publishing an article on Solomon Schechter right now.
You're welcome to join and seeing that manuscript. I can't describe it all of it. But we also have over here part of the document which was on the shelf beside Codex Sinaiticus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the Codex Comacti Rescriptus. And so for those of you going to the collection, as you talked about that, we just have a couple of these because the whole thing is worth more than several buildings here. But I hope everyone takes what you said. This is a wonderful lecture. But could you...
Kairogeneza?
yeah.
Sure. Let me explain real fast. The word Geniza is a Hebrew word, Genizah. It means a place where you store something but put it away. Think about what we Jews call the third of the 10 Commandments. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. I realize there are different enumerations of it depending on our denomination. But do not take the Lord's name in vain. Part of the Jewish understanding of that is once we've written the Lord's name in a document, we never simply throw that page out. That's considered disrespectful. We will give that page literally a burial, the way you would bury a human body, because burial is considered respectful. If man is in God's image, and the burial of a human is a respectful way to remove the body from the company of the living, then it's also true of books. So a geniza is sometimes a storeroom where texts that have God's name are stored until the time comes that they'll be buried. Now, by a happy accident, the storeroom in the attic of the synagogue in Old Cairo, no one ever scheduled a burial session. So there's literally 1,000 years of manuscripts that were stuffed in that attic. The Jewish scholar Solomon Schechter, who came from Europe to England in the 1880s and found a position in the library of Cambridge University, very important English university. Solomon Schechter was the man who rescued all of those documents that were sitting in a synagogue attic. He took them to Cambridge University. Now there are Cairo Geniza documents in libraries around the world, many of them at the Jewish Theological Seminary where I worked, and as you mentioned, here as well. And so that's what the Cairo Geniza is. It's a wonderful window on Jewish life in the Middle Ages. Also a window on how was the Bible understood in centuries past. And so many features of religious life have been totally understood afresh thanks to the literally treasure trove of documents that were found in the Cairo Geniza. There are other Geniza storerooms as well because it's a generic, but when we say the Geniza, capital G, we're talking about the Cairo Geniza. Thank you for the question. Maybe we have time for one more question, then we'll call it a day. One more question? Well, I have a question for you. Do you have a book at home that really is something of special emotional significance for you? Do you? Okay. What I'd like you to do, this is your homework assignment, is write a little note somewhere, not in the book, but you could connect it to the book, and explain to who you think your heirs might be, a future generation, why this book is important to me, what I know about its provenance, and why it's worthy of being preserved. That's what I'd like you to do. Go home, take a book of your choosing, and let that be the beginning of a family tradition in your family. Okay? That's my assignment. Well, thank you so much.